So my name is Aimee Kohler. I am the founder of The Running Kind, which we started in 2022. And since we started, we have been hosting carbon neutral events in the tri-state area on the East Coast, so Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey. Right now we have 5 events. Next year we'll have 8 events. All of our events are carbon neutral and fully sustainable. So I'm excited to get into some of that with Courtney and Matt today. So, yeah.
Awesome, thank you. And Courtney, do you want to go ahead and give a brief intro?
Sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Courtney Morrissette. I'm a program manager at a nonprofit called the Change Climate Project. And we run a certification called the Climate Label, formerly Climate Neutral, where companies can come to us and use our software to estimate their emissions or measure them, and invest in climate solutions to decarbonize and meet their targets over time to lower their emissions. And so we've had the privilege of working with The Running Kind and Aimee for a couple of years now, and it's been really amazing to see how this works in the event space, because a lot of our clients tend to be more in the physical consumer goods, but it's really inspiring to see how events like races can be pretty energy and carbon intensive, but folks are taking a step to reduce those. So I'm excited to chat with you more today, and I'll hand it to Matt.
Hey everyone, appreciate the invite to be here. My name is Matt Bone. I work for WM Advisory Services. My team provides consulting for sustainability program development and implementation in the sports and entertainment industry and a variety of other industries. Our services in sports and entertainment are centered on managing 3 core areas. Those are materials management, which means waste, impact data and GHG management, and program capacity building. What our team does is we've taken the model of the Waste Management Phoenix Open, which is one of the largest and most highly attended certified zero waste events in North America. And we've distilled that into a variety of service models to provide throughout the sports and entertainment industry. We also focus on sustainability services and a range of other industries that WM services with hauling. And what we do there is identify novel end-of-life solutions for materials generated in operations that have historically ended up in landfills. I'm excited to talk to you about this as a trail runner myself and someone who's been interested in the industry.
Awesome, thank you guys. Yeah, I'm really excited to hear more about this because I think it's definitely a gap in the running space that we need to fill right now. So as I understand it, Courtney and Aimee have a quick presentation about the Running Kind event and how you're doing real life event emissions calculations.
Yeah, so last year, for those of you that were with us, we talked a little bit about offsetting and got some feedback that it might have been a little dense or confusing. And so I think when we think about having a sustainable event, there are a lot of ways that we can approach that. And so Courtney and I just put together a very, very brief, high-level overview of what it looks like when I personally go through this process each year for each event, so that you guys can have a better, more tangible understanding of like the processes that go into it. And then, of course, Courtney and Matt, feel free to jump in at any point. I know Matt probably will have some good intel on, any of the waste aspect of this as well. So just to give a little bit of context, my events are fairly small local events. We typically have around or under 100 runners at each of our events. And so now working with Change Climate Project, what we have done is at the end of the year, I'll calculate everything for the year. Which can seem overwhelming at times. We'll look at one event today and show a little bit about that. But so this is the basic or the most emissions that come from one event are going to be in your transportation. Runners getting to the event, staff getting to the event, volunteers. And so what's nice about calculating this, being that it's a majority of your carbon footprint, is that we have all that data. We know where people are coming from. They put it in when they register for the race. We have their address, and we have the event location. So to start, this is a standard taken from EPA.gov, and this is the calculation that I use personally. This is just kind of a standard vehicle emission calculation here. So obviously, if people are driving electric or driving diesel, it will be slightly different. And I'll kind of tell you a little bit in the future slides about like how I account for maybe any over or underestimating. All right, Courtney, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so this obviously isn't all of the participants in one event, but this is a chunk of them. And so every event, I'm sure you guys have spreadsheets similar to this that you pull your event registration from. I'll go through person by person and take their city, state, and zip code, plug it into Google Maps, calculate the mileage, and then double that mileage because they're driving to and from the event. And then, as you can see, they're all really nice whole numbers because I'm overestimating. So whatever number it comes to, I just go to the next highest 10, just to kind of make sure that I'm covering my bases. And then on the side, you'll see the calculation, turning the calculation that we just saw in the last slide, using that to turn it into tons of carbon dioxide. And that will be your number that then you're looking at for offsets. So for this event in particular, the number of people we had, the distance they traveled, was around 3 tons of carbon dioxide, and then the waste calculation is down below. I don't know, Matt, do you want to share anything here about like waste calculation and what that looks like, or waste diversion for events?
I don't have content to share, but happy to respond to any specific questions in that area.
Okay. Are there any questions so far?
So I see TerraCycle in there. Is that, I'm vaguely familiar, but is that just a way of sorting kind of market recycle or?
Yeah, so the question was about TerraCycling. So at my events, I have waste, I have recycling, I have compost, and I have TerraCycling available options. And I don't have all of those at the aid stations, but I do go home and sort my trash. So if you don't want to sort your trash, you can have 4 garbage cans at each aid station. But TerraCycling is a great program. I work with GOO, and basically it's any like wrapper that you can collect. So GOO wrappers, honey stinger, a lot of those single-use wrappers that will just go into a landfill. And they send you a shipping label. You just have to put in your information on their website, and then you can ship them basically all of your TerraCycling at the end of your event, and they'll handle it, which I have found really useful in minimizing the amount of waste. Like our waste bucket is usually our least full, which is cool now. Anything to add on TerraCycling, Matt?
I think TerraCycle is a very applicable solution for the industry. They are just an overview of what TerraCycle does is really provide recycling solutions for niche materials that often cannot be recycled in your municipal recycling collection. So the sport wrappers, that's a thing at a few races I've participated in that I've seen bins out at aid stations collecting those wrappers. They look like they get pretty full by the end of the event. But TerraCycle, can be applied on a variety of different difficult to recycle or small items that might be used at your races.
Any other questions so far? Yeah, Rob.
Maybe you can come later, but hold on, Rob.
Terry's running.
So the question I have, and maybe you'll address this later, and right now you're estimating mileage because it's a local event. Would that factor change if you apply?
Definitely, and I do have. I didn't include it in this format, but for those of you that have met Mare, I took a bunch of our runners to Ecuador with her and her company, and we did offset the trip because I felt like it was kind of with the running kind. So we did calculate the emissions for the flights and even the travel to the airport and all of that as well. And it is fairly simple. Like you can always look up a calculator of like how to calculate that. There's a lot of resources out there that are easy conversion factors. All right, Courtney, I think we can go to the next slide. This was just some other things to consider. So lodging, for some of our events we're traveling, and so the lodging factor for me is not large, but I want to make sure those are included. I've been working with Native Energy in that capacity, and they've been doing that calculation for me. And they're a great organization. They provide offset projects, carbon offset projects, and they're based out of the Burlington area. They've been to a few of the US Trail Running conferences before, and are always happy to assist in any like questions or processes that we might not understand on our level. So that's always helpful. And then waste, any facilities, I don't have a business facility, so that's not something I typically calculate. And then like fuel, if you're having a large event and running a bunch of generators or using other power sources, you know, that's something to take into consideration as well. Okay, so the abbreviations on the side are just it's a shorthand for each of my events. So basically, you'll see in the middle column, those are all the emissions in tons of carbon dioxide that I've calculated for each event, and then added them together at the bottom. You'll see the one that is almost 23 tons. That would be our trip to Ecuador. And then they calculated the lodging included in those two events as well. So my carbon footprint for 2024 plus Ecuador was 39 tons of carbon dioxide.
Do we have any questions so far? Yes.
How do you change runner behavior? You put out all those barrels. I've always found I've got recycled barrels. Put them out, and people just use them as trash barrels.
Yeah.
And then the city councilman, I've seen the same thing with municipal trash. People's behavior is terrible.
Yeah.
Including people running it. So how do you change that?
It's taken time. I mean, I am a bit privileged in that I started the company with a focus on sustainability and environmentalism, and so a lot of the initial group that I brought in was like, oh, this is sick. Like, I want to be a part of this. And they've been great, like, stewards for that. And I will say, like, from event 1 to now, the trash separation has improved drastically. I definitely, like, as I sit at home and sort through my trash, which is my least favorite activity of race directing, it's way less that I have to separate out of the appropriate bins now than it was before. I think it's just getting runners in the habit of acknowledging that there are different waste bins.
I really feel virtuous getting the banana peels and the apple cores and the other compostables out on my driveway.
Yeah, watermelon after it's sat for a day. That's good.
Printing pictures of like every piece of waste you could produce at your event and like putting it on the can helps too.
Yeah, we do hang a list, like it'll say waste, and then there's a list of what that includes, or so that people can see it and identify what they have.
Yeah, my question was, do you include things that you're producing for your races? Like, do you do t-shirts or items like that?
We do very minimal merch. We don't do, so one of my biggest pieces of advice is we live in a time of consumerism, and if you don't need it, if it's not bringing value to your runner, eliminate it. In my 3 years of hosting events, I've had 2 people that have complained about not getting a shirt with their registration. No one else cares. You know, we get so many things now that for me, it's really about the experience. And will you get a person every now and then that's like, I didn't get this, that, you know, all these things with my registration? Yeah, but for the most part, if you're providing a really good runner experience, then those little things I don't think matter as much as we think that they do. So I don't really have any specific calculations for those items, just because they're quite minimal on my end. But you could calculate like shipping if there's a lot, if you're getting like, you know, a lot of merch in for specific events. Courtney, do you have any insight on that of like any like apparel or things that are coming in for events? How much
Yeah, I was just actually jotting down some notes about that. I first of all, Aimee, loved what you said about how we live in a time of consumerism, and you know, people pay, let's say, $40 to enter a race, and they expect to get, you know, the shirt, and maybe everyone gets a medal at the end. And if you're only charging, you know, a smaller fee and you're getting these t-shirts or other materials that are, you know, logistically on the cheaper end because you have a bottom line to keep in mind, those materials are going to be more carbon intensive. Not that, you know, an organic cotton t-shirt is 0 carbon, but if you're buying shirts from Amazon or kind of mass wholesaler where you're getting them for, you know, a super cheap price per unit, that's gonna by nature be more carbon intensive than if you were to purchase a recycled cotton option or an organic cotton, or you know, maybe something a little bit more on like recycled dry fit material. So great to keep that in mind when we talk about emissions from apparel and shipping. That's definitely something to keep in mind, and especially for folks that are in your industry. If you're buying a lot of those things, that's likely to be a pretty high contributor to your overall footprint. So would definitely recommend looking into estimating those emissions. If so, like I said, the emissions will come from the material itself. So cotton, polyester, these can all be pretty carbon intensive materials. So to actually make the t-shirt, so worth looking into. And then the shipping, right? So again, we order things from Amazon and they arrive sometimes like you order it at 10 p.m. and somehow it's on your doorstep at 8 a.m., which is like mind boggling to me. Or even if you're ordering it from overseas, the emissions associated with either the freight or the air shipping with that is important to keep in mind because that will add up. And so, as Aimee said, there's a number of tools that you can use to look into these emissions. Native is a great option, as the Running Kind has used our software, which is called the Business Emissions Evaluator, also allows people to estimate their emissions, including things like raw materials, purchased goods like t-shirts and other kind of swag, and shipping. And I'm actually excited to share that just last week we launched what we call Estimation Plus, which I think is going to be great for folks like yourselves, because this allows you to estimate your emissions without, you know, paying for the full carbon calculator, but you also can refine your data a little bit. So you'd be able to share exactly, you know, how much you've traveled, how much you've purchased, what, you know, what shipping method you've used for your goods and services. And so kind of shameless promotion for our tool, but as Aimee said, there's a number of other tools out there that you can use to get a sense of what your emissions are. So when we're talking about kind of shipping and apparel, I think if you're investing a significant amount of money in those, it's definitely worth looking into the emissions there as well.
Something really cool to add that has nothing to do with carbon footprint, but I've started working with a company called Print Natural, and they are working with another group that's just developed a carbon neutral ink. which is super cool. And they'll give you like a discount. It's black. For those of you that ran this morning, it was the shirt that I had on. It's super high quality and it sets really nicely in the fabrics, but they'll give you like a discount for even using it. And it's just a really cool way to see kind of that space evolving a little bit more. They also will note on their website, like when you go to look at different apparel pieces, what like all the materials and kind of like the sustainability factor of each of the apparel items you're looking at, which is nice.
It's more like, it's not exactly a costume, it's more like something I want to share. It's a practice that I found really amazing for another race that happens in central Mexico, actually. It's not related to the race I did it. But I found that it's a big race. It has really, it's well known and it has a really good reputation and a lot of runners go there. And it's called Desafío Las Nubes, which means like the challenge in the clouds, something like that. And what they do is they replace entirely all the medals, for example, and what they do is they make the people make their own medals. So they're craft, they're do-it-yourself medals, and it encourages them to actually put a lot of content on social media, so you can see when the race is going to happen. You see people like making the medals, and they do just whatever they want. Like they just put the name, and they put even like congrats messages. It's really beautiful practice, and it's all recycled materials. So they encourage them to do recycled organic materials. And I found it like really amazing practice. And it's obviously at the beginning, I guess it had a little bit of backlash, and people were probably not so sure about it. But then because they have they're a good race, a lot of people get in, a lot of really known racers and trail runners in Mexico there. And so they eventually now become a really nice practice. I haven't been able to do it myself because I don't feel like they're gonna like it, like the runners. But eventually it's something that maybe I'm gonna start doing with the kids, for example, instead of doing the race with the kids. Like gonna tell them like bring your medal or something like that, and then probably start going from there. But it's something that I found really like a good idea. If you get the chance to check it on the social media, they have this. And so I think it's gonna be on February, and it's really cool to check everything everybody's doing, all the craft, and it's really like.
That's really cool. I think that goes right back to it's about the experience and not the goods. You know, like if people are having a tangible experience that they're leaving with, like we use reusable bibs. We use like a cloth bib, and it's so silly, but people love it. They want to take it with them every time. They're upset to give it back, and they're like, "This is so cool! Like we never do. Like it's unique." And it, you know, those tangible things that like leave runners with like, "Oh, this was something I'll probably never get at another race," is really unique and cool.
A very important detail is that the people that get there, they actually bring their medal with them when they're running, and they put it on the people behind them. So you always you participate in the race as well, because you are giving the medal you made to the people behind you, and the people in front of you give you the medal. So
that's really cool. I love that. All right, Courtney, I think we can go to the next slide. Do you want to talk about this, Courtney?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. And so after you've measured or estimated your footprint based on all the factors that Aimee just talked about, as a part of our certification, we require companies to set 2 reduction plans. And I would say that even if you're not going through our certification process or working with us, reduction planning is super important. And we've already talked about a lot of ways that you as event organizers and race leaders can start thinking about how to reduce your footprint over time. So the idea behind what we call reduction action plans is that these are short-term actions meant to set you up for success on long-term climate goals. So there's a lot of buzzwords in the climate industry. You'll hear people saying, oh, we want to reach net zero by 2050 or cut our emissions in half by 2035. And And those are great goals. Those are super important goals. However, if you set a goal like that and you're like, cool, that's maybe a problem I've got to worry about in a decade, you're not going to achieve that goal like anything else, right? You're all runners. You set a goal and you work towards it. And so the idea behind reduction planning is exactly that. So thinking about how are you going to reach that 2035 target, that 2050 target. And so these are plans that you'll set. For example, Aimee, love the cloth bib example, right? Let's say you use disposable paper bibs, you know, the conventional bibs at every race. Maybe you set a plan to say we're going to transition 50% of our races to have cloth bibs, you know, in the next 2 years. That's a great way to cut down on your waste emissions and also your raw materials emissions, right, of the paper that you're using. So the idea is that these goals be super specific and ideally quantitative so you can track them and achievable within the next 12 to 24 months so that you're kind of using them as building blocks to meet your longer term climate goals. And so Aimee has really graciously shared some of the examples of plans that the Running Kind has used for the certification process. So again, the idea here is that these plans are kind of bite-sized changes that will stack up over time to ultimately significantly reduce your emissions. So a few examples here that Aimee has set. First is that they'll committing to only purchasing items with a 5+ year lifespan to reduce waste and energy use. This is an awesome plan to target capital goods. So things like, you know, computers. We'll talk about this in a bit, but there's some really cool solar chargers that the Running Kind team purchased this year. And so those larger kind of capital expenditures that will, you know, hike up your emissions over time. The other one, which we talked about a lot today, is reducing waste from events by 50% by waste management, recycling, TerraCycling, composting. Aimee is clearly putting a ton of work behind this, which is great. And then somebody else, I think I couldn't quite hear, but in the audience mentioned the education piece, right? So really getting those behavioral changes underway. So they're committing to also have those programs, but educating the community to use those sources both at events and in their personal lives. So that will target your waste emissions. And then finally, reducing employee commuting emissions by 25%, excuse me, for all volunteers and event participants by implementing carpooling strategies that participants can utilize and find runners in their area. This is a great way to cut down on some of those transportation emissions that Aimee identified earlier. And just kind of gives you a sense of how you could use the communities that you've built to help you towards meeting these emissions reduction goals. So these are just a few examples of some really specific plans you can put into place. No plan is too small. It can seem intimidating at first, but the smaller you start, whether it's setting up a recycling bin, setting up an education program, someone I think said hanging signs, like that's a great way to kind of get the behavior shift, which is ultimately what we're looking for here.
Any questions on the reduction emission plans? This is a great place to start. Like if you're like, I want to be more sustainable, I hear what you're saying, but the offsetting is overwhelming to me. Like write down some tangible things that you want to improve upon and hold yourself accountable in that area. So that way, you know, in a few years, it might not seem as overwhelming to get into the emission and offset side of things. All right, Courtney.
Great. So with that in mind, we'll talk a little bit about climate funding here. And I want to start out by sharing that there's many different types of climate funding you can do. For example, we've talked, offsets have been mentioned a lot today, and I know that can feel really abstract and complex. Sometimes I can't wrap my head around it. Matt, I know, works with this too, so you probably feel our pain as well. And climate and carbon offsets, carbon credits, these are great ways to move forward the transition to a net zero economy and global landscape, right? When you're purchasing a carbon credit, you're investing in wind power or solar power, for example. So it's kind of helping to scale those solutions up. However, it can feel abstract, like I mentioned, because you might be investing in projects that are in India, for example. So you're like, okay, well, my race was in Pennsylvania, so I'm not really sure how that computes, and it all feels a little bit complicated. So that's a carbon offset or a carbon credit. There are other types of climate funding which we have recently introduced into our certification process. And the idea behind this is that these will be direct value chain line items or spend types that kind of build off of your reduction plans. So that's money that you're spending to directly reduce your footprint. So while an offset is great and it's a great climate solution, it's not actually reflecting back into your own footprint, but an investment into decarbonizing your value chain is. So that's what we call value chain abatement. So that's things like investing in TerraCycling or the cloth bibs, organic or recycled cotton t-shirts, things like that. And so what we have, and I'll break this down as part of our certification, companies are required to calculate what we call a climate transition budget. And so this is calculated based on a company's total emissions. So if we look at Aimee's footprint, I think you said it was 39 tons. And we multiply that by a carbon fee of $15 a ton. So that would put Aimee's climate transition budget at $585. And there's a few ways that she can go ahead and allocate that. One way is through carbon credits, which I'll talk about in a minute. But another way is through some of those direct value chain abatement initiatives like we talked about. So Aimee, I'm actually super interested I keep mentioning the cloth bibs, but I think that would be great to think about next year for your certification. So here we really want to reward companies for the investments that they're making in order to reduce their footprint over time. So if you're paying a price premium for, let's say, purchasing t-shirts that are recycled cotton versus conventional cotton, we want to reward that price premium because you're making that decision based on the fact that you want to reduce your footprint. If you're investing in a TerraCycle bin, that cost is a great example of what can count. And so we want this to be included and captured under that direct value chain category. For our certification, because we want folks to start to think about decarbonization in this way, we require a 10% minimum on this type of spend. The other side of the climate transition budget is carbon offsets, what we call beyond the value chain. So again, when you purchase things like carbon credits, those are great initiatives, but it's not going to directly reduce your emissions as an organization. And so that falls outside of your value chain, right? And so you can apply up to 90% of your total budget towards carbon credits. And then finally, there's a third category called other contributions. And this is to reward participation in advocacy activities. So things like any education that you're doing about your waste initiatives, if you're developing a carpooling community within your race group, staff time or volunteer time dedicated toward that can count. And that is under the other contributions category because that's sort of like setting you up to reduce your emissions. It's not going to directly reduce emissions yet, but the time researching and planning that is still a good step forward. And so we want to reward that as well. And so up to 15% of the budget can be allocated towards that. And then finally, carbon credits, which we can see what Aimee has invested in here. This world can feel really daunting, and there's a lot of hot button talk about carbon credits and are they valid? Is it greenwashing? And it can feel intimidating. But I would say if you're interested in investing in carbon credits, I'm happy to chat and provide some resources. You can also take a look at our website. Our standard really values investing in high quality carbon credits that are verifiable and that the outcomes are documented. And so you're not at risk for greenwashing. And like we said, there's definitely a seat at the table for carbon credits. So this just shows kind of the allocation of Aimee's portfolio that she she allocated towards these projects. So it looks like there's a forestry project, actually 2 forestry projects, which are wonderful. I know that was a lot of information, so I'm happy to pause, and I know we're coming up at time, so I want to give Matt a chance to speak as well.
Yeah, if Matt wants to jump in real quick and add in what his thoughts are on the primary factors that he's found to be the most effective at reducing event emissions for races from his experience with waste management. If you want to jump in on add anything.
I can jump off on the question of effective methods of reducing emissions at events. Would also comment on just a couple of questions. I think I heard it's not coming through perfectly clearly for me, but how to measure emissions associated with purchasing, I think, is a very important topic you should be thinking about. Happy to follow up on that after if we have more time to speak about it in another format potentially. As well as the behavior change around waste. But I think when we talk about in terms of what is effective at reducing emissions at events, we know a lot of the physical changes, the actual behavior changes and changes in equipment that can reduce emissions. But I think the key question a lot of you will ask next is then how do we fund it? You know, how do we bring these investments, infrastructure, technology, equipment, or behavior, and really get it into the setting of the race that we're at. And for that, I want to share 2 examples that I've seen as effective in the sports industry, and one that specifically in running. One really, what you can do here is drive action and funding towards climate initiatives through sponsorship engagement is one of the most effective platforms to pool funding and to catalyze action. So with the WMPO, they have an initiative where every sponsorship has a small percentage, I think it's about 2% of it, value is taken and pooled into a fund that is focused on targeting sustainability investments. Those go into initiatives to reduce waste, initiatives to conserve or refresh water resources in Arizona, and a variety of other initiatives to manage impacts on site and in the supply chain of that event. Another way I've seen was from the New York Roadrunners. Don't know if anyone in the audience here represents that organization, but if you do, one of my colleagues supports their event sustainability directly. And they have an initiative with New Balance called the Team for Climate. This is an opportunity that gives athletes a chance to enter their qualifying races based on commitments to supporting or to building resources around climate action causes. And this is a way of, again, channeling funding towards sustainability investments directly for the event. I can speak more on other areas of events where you're likely to see large emissions. A few things that I don't think have been brought up today is food being a key category of your procurement, where you can really manage emissions based on different purchasing decisions. And going back to the conversation around purchasing emissions as a whole, typically this is the second highest category of emissions that I measure for an event, and really regardless of scale, whether it's a participant trail-based event or an event for an international sporting competition in a major stadium. Usually the list of impacts that you're seeing is travel is number one and purchasing is number two, and everything else is really usually a distant third place to those 2 categories. And while it's pretty difficult to directly reduce emissions per dollar in a measurable way, what you can do is target emissions in your purchasing by focusing on environmental product attributes, looking for product labels that are backed up by sustainability initiatives. I think Aimee and Courtney have brought up a few, but for example, you know, a simple target to source 100% of the paper that you use from fully recycled paper is going to take some time to show emission reductions, but is a way that you can align your purchasing to carbon options. And I know that was quite wide ranging, so I'll pass it back.
does anyone have any questions for any of the three of our panelists? Terry's ready to come back.
Thank you for this. This, in comparison to last year, this is a bit more granular, but, you know, I guess I have to go back and review all the math and all that stuff. But to someone's earlier point, you know, people are just, I live in Central Florida where in my county, they just got rid of recycling, because it costs too much money. And, you know, is there like a low-hanging fruit, biggest guide to what we do and how we can educate our participants, our public on how to, you know, make a difference? I give an example. So I have an idea in the hopper for a trail 5 and 10K, mostly geared toward youth next year. And, you know, to educate them with something like this, obviously will make them more responsible adults when they get older. But, you know, I want to make it sound like I live in an area that people just don't care. But I don't think they have the bandwidth to kind of absorb all this stuff. So, you know, if there's some low-hanging fruit, a cheat sheet of how we can best apply this to what we do without taking too much time to educate the public. Maybe all that math we don't share with them, that's for us, right? But, you know, hanging photos on bins, that's a great idea. But are there some best practices as pertaining to running races that is out there? If not, is there any interest in creating something like that? So we can probably apply that instead of trying to do math.
You're trying to give me a fifth job, huh, Rob? Yeah, I mean, that would be great. There's not anything to my knowledge that's out there like that right now. I think, you know, the major points of advice I would have are like your partnerships. You know, for me, would I take money from anyone? No. For me, it's very much, I make sure that the brands that are associated with the Running Kind are sustainable or ethical in some way, shape, or form, so runners are associating that. I do think like the waste bin education is a simple, easy ad that you could do right away. You know, it's the tangible things, like I said earlier too. I know not everyone wants to add more work to your plate. One of our main sponsors is Who Gives a Crap. It's a sustainable toilet paper brand, and so the first thing that runners are getting when they come to an event is a roll of toilet paper. And explaining like how that connects is really fun, and people love it, and it's an easy like, oh, this is really weird and cool, and like, of course trail runners need toilet paper. So, you know, like trying to find creative ways that you can link different brands or ideas. You know, we have recycled finisher pins, but you know, I know not everyone wants to kind of craft those, so finding different tangible things that people can hold and be like, okay, this is not plastic, like this is sustainable in some way, shape, or form, I think is huge. And thanking people, like when I get to a start line, the first thing I say is like, you all chose to run carbon neutral today, and like by coming to this event, you know, you are part of this movement that we're trying to establish. And so it makes people feel like they're part of something bigger just by signing up for a race, which is cool.
Awesome, thank you guys so much.
We've
Yeah,
got time
like
for one quick question. So if you
It's just a comment for Rob. A comment for Rob, and maybe, I don't know if like Aimee has seen more of it, but I'd love to see more plogging events where like folks go out and like clean up the trails that they love. And specifically for your topic on like kids and how to get them to see and basically do the work that the adults should be doing, right? Like they don't have a good example to follow. So I don't think it's necessarily that they don't have the bandwidth, but rather that they're not being shown. So I would suggest like let's organize some plogging outings with our kids on that trail so that they can see the litter that is there, how easy it is to pick it up, how easy it is to know where to put it, and then sort of create that mentality from the ground up.
great comment. And
I think we can also have an opportunity, we don't have to do it restricted just to the trails. We can also do it in the rest of our community as well. But make sure that our community knows who's doing it and why we're stepping up.
I will say one last thing before we wrap up, is coming off of like the permitting panel, I think this was a perfect segue, and we're in a time right now where it's really important that as leaders in this community and industry, that we are prioritizing the grounds that we run on and that we utilize for our events and that we make money off of. And so even though this doesn't feel sometimes as tangible, you know, purchasing offsets and investing in sustainable solutions for your events, it's really important. And I think it's becoming more and more important to the runners in the community as well. So if you can do that, I'm happy to chat with you about it after. I don't have all the answers, and I'm figuring it out as well. So happy to brainstorm or whatever.
Okay. Brilliant. Round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Matt.